Welcome back to my channel. My name is Ashley and I'm here to talk about books. Today I am coming at you with my January wrap-up. I know that it may be a little bit late, but I am new here to BookTube and I recently posted my BookTube newbie tag, so I'll link that video down below for you to watch if you're interested. I thought it would be appropriate for me to kind of backtrack a little bit, talk about the books that I read in January and February so that I can kind of just be up to date. My February wrap-up will be coming soon. It will not be in this video, it will be a different video, but if you are interested, you can subscribe, maybe even click the bell so you get a notification when I do upload. A majority of the books that I am talking about in this video were either on my Kindle or they were from the library and I have already returned them. So those ones I'll just put a little book cover. I do have the first two books that I'm talking about were books that I own. Also, the books that I selected to read for the months of January and February, you'll notice that I am participating in a lot of challenges, like book challenges this year. I am doing the A to Z challenge, which is my first time doing that. It's been a lot of fun. I'm doing the Buzzword cover challenge and the Buzzword title challenge by Books and Lala. I also participate in some readathons that are hosted by Gabby Reads. In January, I did participate in Winterween, so that's where some of these books are coming from. My DNFs will be first if I had any, and then I will do my lowest to highest rated at the end. If you hear any noise in the background, I do have other people who live here and they're making noise. So starting off, we are going to be talking about my one DNF in the month of January, which was Bunny by Mona Awad. This was a book that I picked up for Winterween. I also wanted to try to include it because my A to Z challenge that I'm doing has a couple extra prompts at the end. One of them is an animal on the cover, so that's what I wanted with this book, but I did not finish it, so I will not be counting it towards that challenge. This book follows a character named Samantha, who is a college student. There is a group of girls in her writing cohort who call each other Bunny, and that's kind of where this title comes from. The girls are like rich, they're kind of obnoxious. She's very curious about them, but she also is kind of a loner and she doesn't really like a lot of other people. One day she receives an invite to a thing that the bunnies do, and it's what they call smut salon. She does end up going out of sheer curiosity, but she kind of finds herself diving into their sinister world and kind of partaking in some of the rituals that they have there. So this book really reminded me of Mean Girls, the movie, but it seemed like it would be just a little bit darker. So that was one of the reasons why I was really interested in picking it up. But this is actually my second time giving this book a try. I really could not get into the characters in this book, and it seemed a little bit theatrical, which I know is something that some people might find interesting, but it wasn't grabbing my attention personally. So this one was a DNF. The second book that I'm going to be talking about in this video is The Last Word by Taylor Adams. I read this book for Winterween. It was for the prompt to read a book with the house on the cover, so that was why I picked this one up. So in this book, we are following a character named Emma who is in search of isolation, and she ends up house sitting at a remote beach house for someone who she met on the internet. One of the things that she does is read on her e-reader, and she ends up reading a book that she gives a 1-star rating and leaves a bad review for. The author threatens her to take the review down, which she ends up getting into an online feud with him because she refuses to take it down. Then, in her isolation at this house and kind of being unfamiliar with her surroundings, some weird things start happening and she suspects that the author is coming after her for revenge. I did read 2 other books by this author previously. I read No Exit, which I loved, and then I read Hairpin Bridge, which I really did not like. So when I was going into this book, I was kind of nervous, like I had 2 polar opposite opinions on previous books that I read from this author, so I really did not know what to expect, but the premise really grabbed my attention, so I wanted to give it a try. I really liked the atmosphere because it is isolated. It felt very spooky. It's set in Washington, so there's like rain. That kind of put me into the thriller headspace. And I think I really did enjoy this book up until like the halfway point. At that point, I was thinking of giving it like 3 to 4 stars, but then it started just getting really twisty, but not in a good way. It was like too many twists back to back. Character was all over the place. She did not know what she believed. She did not know how she felt. I was getting the feeling that this was reading as kind of like an action book, which I tend to just zone out. Like when I'm watching an action movie, I'm not interested and I zone out through all of the action. It's not my thing. And that's kind of how I was feeling about this book towards the end. Also, the antagonist in this book was giving Scooby-Doo villain type of thing. It was kind of corny, and this was also one of those books where the ending was just way too long, way too long. And I'm like, how is there still more story to tell? I started building a puzzle and listening to the audiobook and was like, this still is not over. There's still more to this book. By the end of this book, I was just glad that it was done, which isn't really a good thing. I did end up giving this book a 2.5. The next book is If You Tell a Lie by Lucinda Berry. I love Lucinda Berry. She's one of my favorite authors. I do plan on reading her entire backlist at some point. Her books tend to fall in the category of like psychological thriller. They have really good trauma representation. I can't speak for all of her books because like I said, I haven't read them, but the ones that I have read so far have all fallen within that realm. So in this book, we have 2 different timelines and it follows a group of girls. The first timeline is from when they were children and they went to a summer camp together. The second timeline is 20 years later in the present day when they're adults. Someone that they knew from camp is being released from prison and they went to prison for something that these girls may or may not have had something to do with. They're getting together in the present day because they all started receiving these chilling letters talking about how the sender knows the truth about what happened. And now they're kind of scrambling together, trying to figure out what they're supposed to do and really seeking out the truth about what happened. I read this book for the Buzzword title challenge. In January, it was to read a book that had truth or lies in the title. And since this book did start with the letter I also added it to my A to Z challenge. This does have really good trauma representation. There is talk about an eating disorder in this book, and I feel like she did throw in her good trauma rep that she usually does have in her novels. Also felt sort of like a letdown because I was going into it knowing that it was a Lucinda Berry and I was hoping that I was really going to love it, but I didn't, which is sad because it's actually one of her newer published books too. It felt very middle of the road to me. I wasn't really leaning one way or the other. There was a lot of things that I didn't really like about this book. It just has way too many characters and way too many points of views. I have a really hard time to keep them all separated and to remember who is who. I also didn't really find it necessary to have heard from every single one of these characters. Like, not all of them played a really big part, in my opinion. I think it could have definitely benefited from having a little bit less points of views. It's okay for there to have been as many characters as they are, but I didn't think we had to hear from all of them. I ended up giving this book a 3-star. I would have rated it a little bit higher, but I also didn't find any of the things that were being revealed to be very shocking. I kind of saw a lot of it coming, so yeah, it wasn't really my favorite from her. The next book that I have for you is To Be Devoured by Sara Tantlinger. I am not entirely sure, but I think that this one does classify as a extreme horror book, which is something that I also read, but those ones tend to be a little bit on the nose for me. Sometimes I don't really like them, and I have DNF'd a few extreme horror books just because it's not like they were horrifying. I didn't think that they were so scary, like I was scared. It's just that they were disturbingly uncomfortable, and it was just like the subject matter was something that I didn't really want to read about. But if this is an extreme horror book, I would say it's a little bit on the lighter side out of the ones that I have read. So in this book, our main character's name is Andy, and she is obsessed with vultures, specifically what vultures eat. She really wants to be like the vultures and kind of be accepted by them as like one of their own. This is a really short book, so I'm not going to go much farther into the plot for you guys. I think that's something that you just kind of would have to pick up and read. I believe it was only 89 pages, if I'm correct. But yeah, I found the writing in this book to be really poetic, but also gross at the same time. Some of the imagery and the feelings that it provided for me were stomach turning and just really gross. But I kind of knew that going into it, so it wasn't surprising to me at all. But really, this book is a story about obsession. She lets her obsession get the best of her and really just make decisions for her, kind of. The author went into extreme detail about the things that this character wanted to eat and how she felt about the things that she was eating. There was just so many things that she consumed in this book that you don't even want to think about consuming. And yeah, that was very disturbing and gross to read. The ending of this book did require a lot of focus for me to understand what was going on. Is very mentally unwell and has been spiraling for quite some time, so you're just along with her for the ride. I could see myself revisiting this one in the future just because of how poetic the writing was, and it is such a short book that I feel like I could really do a deep dive into this one. I did end up really liking it for what it was. I gave it a 3-star, but I did like it more than If You Tell a Lie. The next book that we have to talk about today would be Dead Inside by Chandler Morrison. How do I even talk about this book? This is an extreme horror book, but it's different because this one, the author wrote it satirically. They wrote it kind of poking fun at the extreme horror genre and how the authors in this genre will just write the most grotesque, disturbing things for shock value, and that they don't put a lot of work into the story itself and what's going on behind all of those shocking and disturbing things. By the way, if you pick this book up, I did not recommend it to you. That's all I'm saying. So in this book, we are following a hospital security guard. He has a very disturbing and questionable taste in women. His criteria for the women that he likes is that they have to be dead. That's the criteria. He ends up meeting a maternity doctor who also works at the hospital, and she has also some very peculiar secrets. Not really the same as what he has. She likes to eat things, and I don't want to go into too much detail because I don't want to spoil the book for anyone who does want to read it. Some people would say that these two people fell in love, but I don't really see it that way. I just think that they ended up developing some really sick relationship with each other. This book is fucked up. One scene in this book was so disturbingly gross that I actually put it down and considered not picking it back up again. But then I sat on it for like 20 minutes and I was thinking about it and I'm like, how much worse could it actually get? And then curiosity got the best of me and I ended up picking it back up. One of the things that I did really like about this book though is that the main character has such a dry sense of humor and a general disdain for humanity. I did find that to be redeemingly funny, but at the same time, he also mentioned so many times throughout the book that he dead women. That could have been on purpose by the author because he did write it in like a satirical sense. So I don't really know if that was just something that he did intentionally or if it really just was an annoying thing about the book, but I guess that's kind of the point. I ended up rating this book 3.5 stars. The next one that I have to talk to you about would be Phantom Limb by Lucinda Berry. I read this one for Winterween and I did add it to my A to Z challenge. So this book is about two twin sisters named Emily and Elizabeth, who grew up in an extremely abusive and neglectful childhood. These two found solace in their relationship with each other. They ended up growing up to be quite codependent on one another. Specifically Emily, who remains cooped up in their shared apartment. Elizabeth is the sister who has a job and provides for the household, so she's more functional, while Emily is struggling to cope. One day, Elizabeth wakes up in the hospital and the only thing that she remembers is that the night before she had found Emily's body in their bathroom, and she is being told that she attempted to take her own life as well. So from here on, we're following Elizabeth, who was involuntarily discharged into a group home of sorts, where she sees a psychiatrist. As the reader, you are also trying to uncover what happened, and in her discovery of what happened, she also does come upon some traumatizing things that are coming back up. This book was so engaging. I could not stop reading this book. The content in this book can be very triggering to some people, so I would say definitely look up content warnings if you're going to read this one. And like I said prior, she does have really good trauma representation in her books. So this one does have good trauma rep for eating disorders, childhood neglect, sexual assault, and codependency. And the ending twist in this book had me reading in disbelief for the rest of the book. And when I was done with it, I wanted to go back and read it again just so that I could see what I missed. What didn't I pick up on? I gave this book 4.5 stars. Okay, and then last but not least, my favorite book of January, which was Crossroads by Laurel Hightower. This is a grief horror story. It follows a mother named Chris who has recently lost her teenage son in a horrific car accident. She visits his roadside memorial daily and is just completely swallowed by the grief and the loss of her loved one. One day, upon visiting his roadside memorial, she does accidentally cut her finger and she bleeds onto the ground. And then later that night, she is visited by an otherworldly spirit. For the rest of the book, she kind of becomes consumed by this spirit that's visiting her because it may or may not be her son. And as a reader, you're left wondering, is this a hallucination? Is this really happening to her? Or is she just that far into her grief that she's accepting whatever this is as a sign or something that has to do with her son? It is only 110 pages and this one packs a punch. I felt so much for this main character and even some of the side characters in this story. I feel like all of the characters that were in this story really stood out. I think Laurel did an amazing job capturing the grief and the despair of losing a loved one. If you're someone who has been through dealing with the loss of a loved one, then I feel like you can empathize with this character a lot more than maybe somebody who's just picking the book up. When you lose somebody, you spend so much time stuck in that grief and feels like it's a mistake and this is not something that actually happened. And almost like you're waiting for somebody to just jump out and say surprise, this person's still alive. That is very real to what it feels like going through it. Your world has stopped, you're at a standstill, but the clock just keeps ticking. Everyone around you just keeps moving on with their lives and you're stuck processing these emotions that you don't really want to be processing. So yeah, I really, really loved this book and I did not stop thinking about it for several days after I put it down. So with it only being 110 pages, I think it is very impactful. I rated this book 5 stars. I loved this book. It is now one of my all-time favorites. If I could rate this book 10 stars, I would. All right, guys, there are all 6 books that I read in January. Like I said, I do have a February wrap up coming here soon. I did read 10 books in the month of February, so I am working on that video as well. If you liked this video, please give me a like and maybe a comment if you have anything you would like to say. And until next time, see you guys later. Bye.